Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here today. I'm Todd with Bloomberg Associates. I previously worked in city government myself and have worked with a number of the cities that are represented on stage here today. The subject of this panel is power to the people, and talking about how to empower residents and citizens to become more involved in their city government. We'll talk about open source, we'll talk about data-driven governance, and we'll talk about equity in the tech sector. And I have three very prestigious folks from city governments around the world, all quite different. We have Néjia, who is the CIO of the city of Paris. We have Braszko, who is the Chief Innovation Officer instead of Information Officer for the city of Kansas City. And we have Miguel, who is the Deputy Mayor of the City of Los Angeles for Budget and Innovation. So I'd like to start first to talk about our panel topic and what it means to empower residents to have impact on their city. And Miguel, when we talked earlier, you had a very interesting idea about what the idea of power is and how to empower people and even work against power in some cases.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. Miguel Sangalang. Thinking about the topic and actually the number of commas that are in the title of the event, it was kind of interesting to try and figure out, because data-driven governance itself is just one entire discipline. Yeah, digital equity, a huge principle, and then open source, a very transformative but intentional kind of process that you're trying to engage in. And I think the best way to kind of sum it up is, in order to answer that question of power to the people and how do you give power to people, you have to kind of answer what is power, where is it at, and who the people. Because some combination of that actually leads to, I think, two different tracks. One is the power to overcome, and one example of that is looking at what happened in LA for our CleanStat. And CleanStat is essentially our response to what was a system that was driven by complaints. And so places like West LA, who are often much more affluent, had more time to complain about the general cleanliness of the city in comparison to South LA. And until we actually had an index that shows, no, we have to deploy our resources in these other areas that are frankly, poor areas of the city, it would have continued that kind of difference of equity and service. And then there's the power to engage. That's the other side that I'm talking about. And an example of that would be what we did with Shake Alert LA. And that's a tool that we've created in order to engage residents and warn them about earthquakes. But before the earthquake happens, we have an entire kind of checklist and engagement process to make sure that families are prepared. We engage them by giving them the information when an earthquake's happening, and then finally, post the earthquake, we're intending to then give them more information on how they can better receive city services and give feedback to us. So there's two differences in there.
Néjia and Alex, you're in very different cities from Los Angeles. What does this issue mean to you, and what about some of Miguel's points about the digital divide and enabling people who maybe don't have the same access to technology?
So, as the title implies, everything for the most part, even digital equity to an extent, focuses on the data that a city can have access to help it to make the best decision, the wisest decisions. And then the data itself doesn't necessarily hold the city accountable to ensure that they're doing the right things for the right reasons, right? But it's definitely a tool that's helpful to empower the people as far as letting them know that you're making a decision based on not politics or not agendas or preferences, but basically that you're really trying to do what the facts are showing you need to be done to help them.
Right. And Néjia, you mentioned one of the ways to empower people is to give them tools, and as a Chief Information Officer, you do that?
Yes, the first thing to give some power to the people is probably to give them first the information, so to be more transparent, and to give them also the possibility to propose projects, to give their opinion. So how to give the possibility to the citizens to give their opinion. We have developed in Paris new platforms e-participation platforms. And maybe the major example is the participatory budget in Paris. So 5% of the capital budget is proposed to the Parisians, and they can, every year, they can propose projects, and after the services analyze the projects, and after there is a period of vote, and these 5% represent 100 million euros per year. So it's a part of the power which is given to the Parisians. And now we have the possibility with the technologies to give this information and to give this power. So we must do it, because now we can do it, as we said before with Miguel. So I think it's the future. We can't escape this. So the technology and the tools, open data, open source, allows this. And we have developed projects in Paris to empower Parisians.
But that's a perfect transition to one of the key elements of the panel today, to talk about open source. And the participatory budget is one example, but you're very invested in open source solutions in Paris. Can you talk about how much of your services are open source and why you chose to go this way?
Yes, we chose open source solutions to be cost effective, to develop very quickly digital services for the residents, to be transparent and to be independent also, because when you have to lead a project and to reach an objective which is given by the mayor or the executive team, you have a deadline, and sometimes it's very difficult in the public sector to have the right contract and to work with IT companies in 2 or 3 months. So with our open source platform, which is called Lutes, the old name of Paris, it's a Java framework, and it enables to develop very quickly these digital services. So we have a digital roadmap. This digital roadmap the objective is to develop services for the Parisians, so it's the front office. And we can have a global vision of all the digital services we offer to the Parisians. Before this roadmap, we had many applications in silos, and it was very difficult to have a global vision and to connect them. So now it's very important to the Parisian and to the residents to have a vision, a unique vision of the services the municipality can offer. So we have also developed a sort of CRM, an account, Mon Paris, My Paris, and on this space, the resident can have all the requests, the answers, and the status of the requests. So we are now trying to connect all the back office applications to this space. And we hope that in 2 years, the residents can have all the status of their requests on this platform. And of course, there is also the open data project. All the data, when it's possible, are open and can be reused by the community or by the Parisians, and they can also check how we use the data and how the algorithms are empowered in the software.
And Alex, I saw you nodding at the idea of having a roadmap, a strategy. Is this something that's important to Kansas City as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So ours dates back to 2015, and we've had, so I'm actually the third innovation officer in Kansas City, so we're a little mature in the experience that we've had with smart city efforts. There's definitely a lot to be said about the value of open source data and data analysis. Primarily, what you were just saying is the timeliness of it. That is very, very helpful, especially when you want to make a good decision. It's great to have those facts as quickly as possible so that you can be responsive to the citizens. But yeah, so open data is also extremely important in that you want to make sure it's clear what you are looking at and how you are making your decisions. And then we have an open data policy in Kansas City as well.
Okay, great. And Miguel, I imagine for you as well, you have Los Angeles has a plan for how it addresses open source and open data.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to kind of touch on the second
section
clause
which is
of
digital
our talk here, because what I've been hearing from both Paris and KCMO is that there's a lot of intentionality in how they're approaching this, and I think for the digital divide itself, there's going to be intentionality required to reach that equity, and intentionality to me means actually a lot more leadership. And this is a place where, you know, if you just let market forces, and as an example in Los Angeles, if you just let market forces go, the telecom companies would be more incented to, there would be more incentive for telecom companies to invest in West LA again, a more affluent, in downtown LA, a more affluent, more dense place for their 5G, 4G installations. But without the leadership of the mayor, to actually drive some of that investment into some of our poorer communities like South LA and East LA and parts of the Valley, we'd have a situation where there's a widening gap between access. And the mayor of Chattanooga yesterday had kind of referenced that you know, some of his constituents were actually able to build a business off of that increased capacity that they have on the internet. And so, you know, not having that more equitable kind of distribution of access for us in Los Angeles would just give Black and Latino communities in East and South LA, you know, a handicap in comparison to their more affluent whiter neighborhoods that they'd be a part of. So I think there's a lot there, and sorry. And the other piece that I was going to say on that, like, I think there's, again, more intentionality and leadership in that we actually won a grant from the National Science Foundation to do a curriculum for the CSULA. It's one of the largest universities there for the Cal State system, and graduates 70% of its 70% of its graduates actually come from within 10 miles, so it's serving, you know, the poorest communities again,
right.
And trying to give them the tools to understand open data and how that works and how to use the information that the city is providing. So there's intentionality again in how we're approaching it from the education side.
And so you spoke about leadership, you spoke about access, you spoke about education, and so somebody to really bring those things together to enable people to be empowered, to be part of their government. Is there also a financial case for the use of open data and creating equity?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. A much longer action is yes, and that's because Los Angeles, there's another mayor that actually referenced, actually it was Ambassador Young yesterday, had referenced that Atlanta has been smart for a while, and I'd say Los Angeles has been smart for a while too. Since the '84 Olympics, we had our ACTSAT system, which is basically signal synchronization throughout the city, and that has led to a 15% decrease in like traffic. Right, so without it, we'd have 15% more traffic, which would be hundreds of millions of dollars of economic loss just in Los Angeles. There's, very, very obvious parts like that. I think when you start going into social services, there's greater and greater need for data and frankly evidence. Right, the best way that I've ever been described, what we're trying to do there is. I was posed a question by the University of Chicago, a person from there, and they had asked me, so if you were ever going to give your son or daughter medicine because they're sick, what would you give them? Would you give them this white tablet or children's Tylenol, right? And there's evidence that was created from the research, the trials that went into that medicine that gave us a higher level of understanding and proof that something's working. So there's just different levels of analytics that have to be kind of built into that decision-making process as well.
If it's okay, I just want to speak to the digital equity. So we have been looking at technology integration, smart city technologies since about 2012 when Google came in to town, and we did a lot of great things. We learned a lot as a city. In 2017, we developed a digital equity strategy, and it was very telling. It was very insightful and enlightening to a lot of people. We had some difficulty in trying to come up with specific ways to actually help. to bridge the digital divide. I think we as a city are now coming up with some of those solutions. We're understanding that digital literacy is a huge part of digital equity in bridging the digital divide. Access, of course, is also a huge thing, but really we had to do a lot of deep diving into the elements and the components of digital equity to understand where best we could assist with that. So.
Néjia, in Paris, are there attempts to bridge the digital divide to give residents the ability to have access to these tools?
Yes. When we develop a new digital service, we also have to, of course, be careful about the digital divide. So in each town hall, we have 20 town halls in Paris, and in the different local services, the residents can find the possibility to address their requests with the help of an employee of the municipality. So we of course, we develop digital services because it's very useful for most of the citizens and the Parisians, but we have also many people who don't have the means to have the possibility to address the requests in a digital way, so they can come to their town hall and do it with the help of an employee of the town hall.
I think, Alex, we talked a bit about community and ways that you can better connect communities. Do you have some solutions in Kansas City that you could share?
Right. So we did look at a couple other cities. So like I said, we're mature in that we got a much better understanding on best practices for integrating technologies from a planning perspective, strategy development perspective, assessment perspective as well. So in taking a look at what we've done and what we've accomplished to date, we realized that we really needed to do a better job of engaging our community. Okay. So we focused our initial smart city efforts and a lot of our technologies downtown, understanding that we created a 2017 digital equity strategy and ensuring that our strategies are all nesting together to maximize productiveness of what we're doing. We did realize that we needed to engage the community a little better. So we looked at other cities. We looked at San Antonio. We talked to a couple other cities and realized it would really behoove us to engage all the stakeholders, right? So the business community, the nonprofits that are very much oftentimes focused on digital equity initiatives, neighborhood committees, as well as internal departments in City Hall. So we're creating something called an Emerging Technology Governance Board, and we're hoping to put into place here, pass it before our council this month in a resolution to help us to focus on emerging technologies, specifically those that are probably the most controversial or elicit the most emotion when you talk about implementing them and integrating them. And we're hoping to do a really good job of deep diving, learning all the nuances of the technologies and get some truth in advertising, and then implement those things via that process.
And I like that you had an approach then for addressing sort of in real life these community members and getting them involved directly.
Yes.
But you've also talked about the need to use social media, to have listening tools, to understand the conversations that are going on in
Right.
that capacity. What are your thoughts around the importance of that, and what are some tools that you can use?
So, we are looking at a couple companies similar to Zen City, and Zen City specifically as far as open source data, being able to look at social media. So we have all the traditional methods. We have 311, we have surveys we send out, right? But the responsiveness of having something that's open source would be very effective, so that we don't have to do our own hunting. It's kind of, it would be helpful for sure.
Right.
If I could just kind of react to that, because I think what you're saying, especially since you're trying to create that technology governance board.
Yep.
What you're saying there is actually quite important for service creation or recreation, because however our technology and our intent of trying to provide some service that solves some problem, there's a massive business case that has to be built on that, and understanding what would happen given the technology and the outcomes are going to be very important at the very beginning of it, so that you could actually produce metrics that you look at and then start looking at how you actually then distribute the limited resources we have.
That's absolutely right. Yep.
And Miguel, you talk about business cases from a public sector standpoint. What about working with businesses, with the tech sector? How can the private sector help to support these efforts to empower people?
Yeah, I think I've been finding that, well, I get a lot of sales calls, first of all, but
Sure.
but beyond that, the private sector has actually been much more engaging in that this is a nascent area for us in seeing the new technologies that are coming in. So we've had successes with partnerships, again, with our telecom companies, like Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, where T-Mobile actually has piloted Fire Spotter with us. And this is a pilot where we're using heat sensing technology to try and help in dense urban areas predict or sense much more quickly where fires are going to be starting. And that allows us to then kind of lower our response time rather than wait for the call and then deploy resources after that. So very cool kind of beginning technologies there. And we've actually created something called I3. I forget exactly what the entire acronym, but it's a integrated Internet of Things kind of consortium with USC, with UCLA, and a few other companies to try and figure out, okay, so IoT, there's many different companies. How do we actually get to a point? Because we can either spend all the money trying to buy into one ecosystem,
right,
or try and figure out how all these different ecosystems work. So how do we get to a point where some of these technologies can actually interact and be much more useful for us, given again limited resources?
Are you finding the same thing, Alex?
Yeah, so public-private partnerships, when done correctly, can be very beneficial. I really appreciate when there is an upfront discussion, an honest discussion about capabilities and limitations right off the bat. That tells me that it's someone I can really work with when we're talking about specific technology. So, you know, it's easy to get mesmerized, and it's easy to look for the silver bullet, especially when you have a very complex or complicated problem. But you know, keeping a level head, not getting mesmerized, having the discussion, and putting out front up, you know, right from the very beginning, what your intent is from using it, and then getting feedback on what other cities maybe have done and other situations, some of the hard questions that they ask up front.
Right.
That makes sure that you're not having regrets when you're actually doing things later on.
Right.
You know? And it will be different for each city, but you know, if you're going to integrate a technology that can, let's say, detect gunshots, how is that different than somebody calling in when they hear a gunshot? How is it different? And is that standalone system worthwhile and useful, or would it be better to integrate it with another technology, which may require another conversation with a different company, but you know, that sort of relationship is great.
Right. Néjia, what do you see in terms of emerging technologies and your use of things like artificial intelligence, facial recognition? Is it early?
No, it's not too early. We began to develop some chatbots to answer resident questions. So our latest platform is connected with another tool, which is a first chatbot. So we have two services empowered with this sort of artificial intelligence. So maybe it's the beginning, but it's very helpful for the municipality to answer questions of the residents, even during the night. Sometimes a resident can have an issue, a problem during the night for the parking of his car or something like that. And he can have the information where he can find his car or what he has to do to get it, if it has been taken. We have also, we are going to develop other services with artificial intelligence. So I don't think it's soon. We have to think about all these new tools, but we also must be very careful because it's public money, so we can do anything. It's not just experiments. It must be effective. It must be useful projects for the residents. So we have to find the good compromise between the innovation and the research, and also the necessity to be pragmatic and to offer a service. So we try to do it.
Right. Well, it sounds like in listening to you, your cities have plans, you're trying new things, you have open dialogues with constituents and communities. The future sounds quite promising. What do you see sort of 20 years from now? Where will we have advanced, and will people be more part of their government or less?
Yes, probably before 20 years.
Hopefully.
The residents will be more involved in the management of the municipality, because with the possibilities of the technologies offer, it can be quick, I think. So it's the future. You can't the way of working of the past. It was a way of working with paper.
Right.
So now, with the digital possibilities, we can't continue to work like 1 century ago. So I think we don't have the choice. And if the public administration doesn't do it, it will be done by other actors.
Mm.
And Alex, you mentioned we're sort of arriving at a turning point.
Yeah, so I guess, like I mentioned before, us specifically in our city, we're mature in our understandings of the value of technology. We're mature in our understanding of planning it well before you implement it. We're understanding the value of assessing things as you go through it. But like you said, there are limited resources, and you want to make sure that the direction that you take is actually going to be worthwhile for everyone from a digital equity perspective. But I think technologies and the value that technology brings is getting more and more normalized. I think it's important for us as innovation officers or information officers to speak to the true challenges that will come with large amounts of data. So you're talking IoT, connected fleets, and cities. That's a whole bunch of data. And we have to be able to look internally and say, do we in our departments have the capacity and the capability to handle all that data? Do we need to invest now in some systems that can help us to better process and analyze that data, or even invest in people, resources, more data-focused positions? So I think we are at a turning point. It is becoming more normalized. There will continue to be great advances in technology that we're all going to have to figure out. And then the last aspect of all that data is the understanding of the value of it, but the privacy issues too. Transparency, open data, privacy issues, ensuring that that's protected as you accumulate all that data.
And Miguel, you're deputy mayor of the second largest city in the U.S. What do you see in the next 20 years?
Yeah, I'd like to react to a little bit to what Néjia had said, because I think what you talked about other actors, and I think it's important for us to make sure that we continue to engage in that realm, because we are safe. We are entrusted with safeguarding the community and people, right? And to what you're saying about technology and having kind of a plan and path, this is an area where I don't think we should have buyer's remorse. And there's going to be some investments that we end up experimenting with, or some technologies that we experiment with that may end up in failure or may end up in great successes. But allowing for that kind of flexibility and ability to kind of continue pushing the envelope for how we involve technology and how our cities will be producing their services in the future is very important to what you're saying. The straight answer to what you're saying is I think that cities will probably not find themselves in a Jetson-like setting, but will be very much places that we all still want to be part of, as we've seen with predictions of half the population, more than half the population going into these large urban areas. And so it's just going to become a better place to live. and it's going to depend on some of these decisions that we're making now. And to what you're saying about the large amounts of data and the privacy, I think that's a huge discussion that deserves its own topic. And one thing I'd say is I actually find it kind of interesting, because then that actually talks about the person and what they're doing. And most kind of videos that I've ever seen that's been produced for a technology, it starts with this huge global kind of shot of the world with the internet and super bright lights, and then it zooms in and you see this very complicated city grid with lots of different things going on, and it zooms past the person to the phone, and there's something else going on in their screen, so you totally miss that middle section of the person there. And that's ultimately who we're all trying to serve. So it's very important.
And so you did bring up something before I just want to mention again. It's like the spectrum of innovation and smart city technologies in cities. Do you want to become Shanghai? Do you want to become a Europe? You want to speak to that? Do you want to become a city, maybe that's like a European city that has GDPR or a framework in place to help you to develop and implement those technologies? Or do you want to be us in the U.S. trying to figure out what our framework is and how we're going about implementing that technology? There's a whole spectrum of directions you can go.
I think we're very optimistic about cities. A colleague who runs the Smart Cities in Copenhagen said the days of we will build it and they will come are sort of over. So I think that all of you have very much a clear plan for your cities. Obviously, you have teams that are helping you to execute on that. I think also we heard a lot of examples of how cities are sharing information with one another, which is something we definitely find in our work. We're working closely with the city of Paris, because they have a platform that they're offering for free to other cities. I know that Los Angeles worked with some other cities on the Shake app that you developed to warn local people about impending earthquakes. So there's definitely a lot of innovation out there that's for the public benefit. And we just have a few seconds left, so I want to take an opportunity and just give a round of applause to our panel. And thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thank you.